Most people think protection is something that shows up after damage is done. They believe strength is built only after pain, after betrayal, after loss. But that's not how real protection works. Real protection begins long before anything breaks. It begins in awareness. It begins in the quiet moments when something doesn't feel right. And instead of ignoring it, you pause, you pay attention, you listen. Because awareness is not loud. It doesn't scream. It doesn't demand attention. It whispers. And the problem is most people are too distracted to hear it. They're caught up in wanting things to work so badly that they silence the very voice meant to guide them. They override their instincts in the name of comfort. They explain away red flags because facing the truth feels inconvenient. But awareness doesn't disappear when ignored. It just waits. And the longer you ignore it, the louder the consequences become. A woman who is protected understands this at a deep level. She knows that the first sign of danger is rarely obvious. It doesn't show up as chaos. It shows up as confusion. It shows up as subtle discomfort, a shift in energy, a hesitation in her spirit. And instead of brushing it off, she leans into it. She asks herself hard questions. She chooses truth over temporary peace. This is where most people get it wrong. They think awareness is overthinking. They think intuition is fear, but they are not the same. Fear is loud and chaotic. It pushes you to react without clarity. Awareness is calm and precise. It guides you without pressure. And when you learn to tell the difference, everything changes. You stop reacting to noise and you start responding to truth. Awareness requires courage because once you see clearly, you can't unsee. Once you recognize patterns, you can't pretend they're not there. And that means you have to make decisions. You have to walk away from things that no longer align. You have to set boundaries that may disappoint others. You have to choose yourself even when it's uncomfortable. But here's the truth most people avoid. Discomfort is not danger. Ignoring your awareness is. A protected woman would rather sit in temporary discomfort than live in long-term damage. She understands that saying no today prevents regret tomorrow. That stepping back now protects her peace later. She doesn't wait for proof to validate what she already feels. She trusts that her awareness is enough. And over time, that trust becomes her shield. It sharpens her perception. It strengthens her decisions. It keeps her one step ahead of what could harm her, not because she controls everything, but because she listens to what matters. Awareness also changes how she sees people. She no longer gets attached to potential. She pays attention to patterns. She observes actions, not words, because she knows that people reveal themselves consistently. You just have to be willing to see it. And when she sees it, she doesn't argue with it. She accepts it, and then she acts accordingly. This is not about becoming cold. It's about becoming clear. It's about understanding that not everything deserves your energy, your trust, or your presence. And once you become aware of that, you move differently, you speak differently, you choose differently, because protection is not about building walls around your life. It's about building awareness within it. And when your awareness is strong, you don't need to chase safety, you become it. There is a voice within every person that speaks before logic, before explanation, before the world has a chance to influence your thinking. It doesn't argue, it doesn't force, it simply knows. And yet, most people spend their lives learning how to ignore it. They trade it for validation. They replace it with opinions. They bury it under noise. But a woman who is truly protected understands something most never fully grasp. Her inner voice is not a suggestion. It is guidance. She doesn't wait for evidence to confirm what she already feels. She doesn't need a second opinion to justify her instincts. Because deep down she has learned that the moment you start questioning your inner voice is often the moment you begin to betray yourself. And self-betrayal is where confusion begins. This is where her strength is different. It's not loud, it's not performative, it doesn't seek attention, it's quiet, grounded, and unwavering. When something feels off, she doesn't explain it away. She doesn't minimize it to keep the peace. She acknowledges it, and more importantly, she acts on it. Because honoring your inner voice requires action, not just awareness. Many people recognize red flags. They feel the discomfort, they sense the misalignment, but they stay, they wait, they hope things will change. They convince themselves they're overreacting. And in doing so, they slowly disconnect from the very instinct meant to protect them. But she refuses to do that. She refuses to negotiate with what she knows is wrong. She understands that clarity doesn't always come with comfort. Sometimes the truth disrupts everything. It challenges relationships. It forces difficult decisions. It creates distance where there once was closeness. But she doesn't measure truth by how easy it feels. She measures it by how real it is. And that changes everything. Because when you honor your inner voice, you stop chasing certainty from the outside world. You stop needing everyone to agree with your choices. You stop explaining yourself to people who were never meant to understand you. You become anchored in something deeper than approval. You become anchored in alignment. There is a discipline in this, a commitment, Because the world will constantly test your ability to stay connected to yourself. It will present opportunities that look right but feel wrong. It will bring people who say the right things but carry the wrong energy. And in those moments, your inner voice becomes your only compass. She has learned to trust that compass, even when it leads her away from what she thought she wanted. That's the part most people struggle with. They trust their intuition when it confirms their desires, but they ignore it when it challenges them. She does the opposite. She listens most closely when it's inconvenient, when it asks her to let go, when it asks her to walk away, when it asks her to choose herself over familiarity, because she knows that every time she honors that voice, she strengthens it. She sharpens her ability to discern truth from illusion. She builds a relationship with herself that cannot be easily shaken. And over time, that relationship becomes unbreakable. This is not about perfection. She doesn't get it right every time. There are moments she hesitates, moments she questions, moments she feels the pull of doubt. But even in those moments, she returns to herself. She recalibrates. She listens again. Because honoring your inner voice is not a one-time decision. It's a continuous practice. And the more she practices it, the more protected she becomes. Not because she avoids every mistake, but because she no longer ignores the signs that lead to them. Because in a world full of noise, opinions, and distractions, the greatest form of protection is not what you hear from others. It's what you refuse to ignore within yourself. Most people misunderstand boundaries. They think boundaries are about controlling others, about creating distance, about pushing people away. But that's not what boundaries are. Boundaries are not about them. They're about you. They are the lines that define where your respect begins and where your tolerance ends. And a woman who is protected understands this deeply. She doesn't wait until she's overwhelmed, disrespected, or exhausted to create boundaries. She establishes them early, clearly, and without hesitation, because she knows something most people learn too late. What you allow is what will continue. There is a cost to having no boundaries. It doesn't always show up immediately. At first, it looks like being easygoing, understanding, flexible. It looks like giving people the benefit of the doubt. It feels like keeping the peace. But over time, it turns into something else. It turns into resentment. It turns into emotional exhaustion. It turns into a quiet frustration that builds every time your needs are ignored because you never made them clear. She refuses to live in that cycle. Instead, she chooses clarity over comfort. She understands that setting a boundary may feel uncomfortable in the moment, but not setting one creates a deeper, longer-lasting discomfort. And she is no longer willing to sacrifice her long-term peace for short-term approval. That's where her strength becomes evident. She doesn't raise her voice to be heard. She doesn't argue to be understood. She communicates her boundaries calmly, directly, and without apology. Not because she lacks emotion, but because she has mastered it. She doesn't need to justify why something doesn't sit right with her. She doesn't need to convince others to agree. Her boundary is not a debate. It is a decision. And that decision is rooted in self-respect. There is a difference between reacting and responding. Most people set boundaries only after they've been pushed too far, after the damage is done, after emotions take over. But she doesn't wait for that point. She responds early. She notices patterns. She pays attention to how people show up. And when something crosses a line, she addresses it immediately. Because delayed boundaries often become ignored boundaries. She also understands that not everyone will respect her boundaries, and she's okay with that. Because her goal is not to be liked by everyone. Her goal is to protect her energy, her time, and her peace. And if someone cannot respect her limits, she doesn't try to change them. She changes her access to them. That's the difference. Many people try to explain their boundaries repeatedly, hoping others will finally understand, but she knows. People don't always need more explanation, they need less access. So instead of over-explaining, she steps back, she creates distance, she removes herself from environments that require her to constantly defend her standards. Because protection is not just about what you say, it's about what you enforce. Boundaries also require consistency. It's not enough to set them once, you have to live by them. You have to reinforce them, even when it's inconvenient, even when it means disappointing someone, even when it means standing alone, because the moment you compromise your boundaries for comfort, you weaken the very shield meant to protect you. She has learned this through experience, through moments where she gave too much, tolerated too much, and stayed too long. But instead of becoming bitter, she became clear. She became intentional. She became disciplined in how she allows others to treat her. And that discipline is what protects her. This doesn't make her cold. It doesn't make her unkind. In fact, it makes her more authentic. Because when you have boundaries, your yes means more. Your presence becomes intentional. Your relationships become healthier because they are built on mutual respect, not silent sacrifice. She no longer fears losing people because of her boundaries. She understands that the right people don't get pushed away by standards. They align with them. And the wrong people, they reveal themselves through their resistance. And that revelation is protection in itself. Because boundaries are not barriers to connection. They are filters for it. They ensure that only those who respect your value get close enough to experience it. And when you live with that level of clarity, you don't just protect your peace. You become someone who can no longer be easily disturbed. Most people struggle to walk away, not because they don't see the truth, but because they're still waiting for it to make sense. They want answers. They want closure. They want that final conversation that explains everything, fixes everything, or at least softens the ending. But here's the reality. They're often searching for clarity in places that were never honest to begin with. A woman who is protected understands this. She understands that closure is not always something you receive, it's something you decide. She doesn't wait for the perfect explanation because she knows it may never come. And even if it does, it may not be truthful. People who create confusion rarely provide clarity. They deflect. They justify, they minimize. And sometimes they say exactly what you want to hear, not because it's real, but because it keeps you from leaving. She refuses to stay in that cycle. Instead of chasing answers, she pays attention to patterns, because patterns don't lie. Words can be manipulated. Promises can be broken. But consistent behavior, that tells the truth every single time. And when she sees that truth, she doesn't argue with it. She accepts it even when it's uncomfortable. This is where her strength becomes undeniable. Walking away without closure requires a different kind of discipline. It means you don't get the emotional satisfaction of understanding everything. It means you leave questions unanswered. It means you accept that some chapters in your life will end without explanation. And that's not easy, because the mind craves resolution. It wants to make sense of what happened. It wants a clear ending. But she has learned something deeper. Peace does not come from understanding everything. It comes from accepting what is. She doesn't need someone to admit they were wrong for her to recognize that they were. She doesn't need an apology to validate her experience. She doesn't need a final conversation to confirm what she already felt. Her clarity doesn't come from them. It comes from within. And that's what makes her dangerous to chaos. Because once you stop needing closure, you stop being controlled by uncertainty. You stop staying in places that drain you just because you're waiting for answers. You stop giving people multiple chances to explain behavior that was already clear the first time. She doesn't chase resolution. She chooses release. And there is power in that choice. Most people stay longer than they should because they believe leaving without closure means something is unfinished. But she understands what's truly unfinished is not the conversation, it's the lesson. And once the lesson is clear, there is nothing left to hold on to. So she lets go, not out of anger, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. She knows that holding on to unanswered questions keeps her emotionally tied to something that is already over. It keeps her stuck in a loop of overthinking, replaying, and hoping. And she refuses to give that kind of energy to something that has already shown her its truth. Instead, she redirects that energy back to herself. She rebuilds her focus, she restores her peace, she reconnects with her purpose, because walking away is not just about leaving someone behind, it's about returning to yourself, and that return changes everything. It shifts her from seeking validation to embodying it, from needing explanations to trusting her perception, from holding on to releasing with confidence. And once she reaches that point, she no longer feels the urge to go back, because she realizes something most people take years to understand. Closure is not found in someone else's words, it's found in your decision to stop seeking them. And when she makes that decision fully and unapologetically, she doesn't just walk away from what no longer serves her. She walks forward into a life that no longer requires explanation. Most people believe strength is shown in how loudly they defend themselves, how quickly they respond, how fiercely they fight back. They think every disagreement must be addressed, every insult must be corrected, every challenge must be met head on. But a woman who is truly protected understands something deeper. Real power is not in reacting to everything, it's in choosing what deserves a reaction at all. She doesn't measure her strength by how many battles she wins. She measures it by how many unnecessary battles she avoids. Because every battle comes with a cost. It costs time, it costs energy, it costs focus, and sometimes it costs peace. Most people don't realize that constantly engaging in conflict slowly drains them. It pulls their attention away from what truly matters. It entangles them in situations that offer no growth, no clarity, and no real resolution. But she sees this clearly. She understands that just because something is in front of her doesn't mean it belongs to her, and that awareness changes how she moves. When faced with conflict, she doesn't react immediately. She pauses, she observes. She asks herself a simple but powerful question: Is this worth my energy? Not her pride, not her ego, her energy. Because she knows that energy is finite, and where she invests it determines the quality of her life. This is where most people get it wrong. They react from emotion, not intention. They feel disrespected, so they respond. They feel challenged, so they engage. They feel misunderstood, so they try to explain. But in doing so, they give control of their peace to external situations. They allow others to dictate how they feel, how they act, and where they focus. She refuses to live like that. Instead, she operates from intention. She recognizes that some people are not looking for understanding. They are looking for a reaction. They provoke, not to resolve, but to create chaos. And the moment you respond emotionally, you step into their game. You give them exactly what they wanted. Your attention, your energy, your time. She doesn't play that game. Her silence is not weakness, it's strategy. There are moments when she could speak, when she could defend herself, when she could prove her point. But she chooses not to. Not because she can't, but because she doesn't need to. She understands that not every misunderstanding requires correction. Not every opinion requires agreement. And not every accusation requires a response. Because some battles are distractions in disguise. They appear important in the moment, but in reality, they lead nowhere. They don't build anything. They don't solve anything. They simply consume. And she has learned through experience that engaging in these battles only takes her further away from her purpose, so she lets them pass. This requires discipline. Because the urge to respond is strong. The desire to defend yourself, to set the record straight, to prove that you're right, it's natural. But she has trained herself to look beyond the moment, to think long term, to understand that protecting her peace today is more valuable than winning an argument that won't matter tomorrow. And that perspective gives her an advantage. While others are caught in cycles of reaction, she remains grounded. While others are distracted by noise, she stays focused. While others are drained by unnecessary conflict, she preserves her energy for what truly matters, her growth, her goals, her purpose. This doesn't mean she avoids all conflict. There are battles worth fighting. There are moments where speaking up is necessary, where standing firm is essential. But the difference is, she chooses those moments carefully. She doesn't fight out of impulse. She fights out of intention. And when she does engage, she does so with clarity, not chaos. That's what makes her presence powerful. Because people begin to realize she is not easily provoked, she is not easily pulled into drama, she is not easily distracted. And that alone sets her apart, because in a world where everyone is reacting, the one who chooses when to respond holds the real power. And when you reach that level of control, you don't just protect your peace. You become someone who cannot be easily shaken, no matter how loud the battle around you becomes. Most people shape their lives around relationships. They adjust their goals to fit others. They shrink their vision to maintain connections. They hold on to people even when those people no longer align with who they are becoming. And in doing so, they slowly drift away from themselves. But a woman who is truly protected understands something most overlook. People are part of your journey, but they are not the foundation of it. Her foundation is purpose. Purpose is what anchors her when everything else feels uncertain. It's what gives direction to her decisions, clarity to her choices, and meaning to her actions. And because she is aligned with that purpose, she doesn't move based on who approves of her. She moves based on what calls her. This is where her strength becomes different. She doesn't chase acceptance. She doesn't mold herself to fit into spaces that were never designed for her growth. She doesn't stay connected to people simply because of history, comfort, or fear of being alone. Because she knows that when you prioritize people over purpose, you begin to compromise parts of yourself just to maintain what was never meant to last. And she refuses to make that trade. Instead, she chooses alignment over attachment. That means she pays attention to how people fit into her life, not just emotionally, but directionally. Are they growing? Are they supportive? Do they respect her path? Or are they pulling her away from it? And when she notices misalignment, she doesn't ignore it. She doesn't try to force compatibility where there is none. She acknowledges it, and then she makes a decision. Because alignment is not something you negotiate, it's something you honor. This doesn't make her disconnected, it makes her intentional. She values relationships deeply, but she values the right relationships, the ones that add to her life, not distract from it, the ones that understand her vision, even if they don't fully share it, the ones that respect her boundaries, support her growth, and don't require her to shrink to stay connected. And when those relationships are present, she invests fully. She shows up, she gives her energy, her time, her presence. But when they are not, she doesn't force it. She doesn't hold on out of obligation. She lets go because she understands something powerful. When you are aligned with your purpose, letting go is not loss. It's space. Space for the right people, space for the right opportunities, space for the right version of yourself to fully emerge. Most people fear that space. They rush to fill it. They replace people quickly, not because it feels right, but because it feels empty. But she doesn't fear it. She trusts it. Because she knows that space is where clarity grows. It's where direction becomes stronger. It's where purpose becomes louder than distraction. And in that space, she becomes even more aligned. This alignment also changes how she navigates life. She doesn't make decisions based on pressure. She doesn't say yes out of guilt. She doesn't follow paths just because others expect her to. Every choice she makes is filtered through one question: does this align with who I am becoming? If the answer is no, she walks away, no matter how appealing it looks, no matter how many people are involved, no matter how difficult it feels, because she knows that every misaligned decision pulls her further from her purpose, and every aligned decision strengthens it. This is not always easy. There are moments where alignment requires sacrifice, where it asks her to leave behind what's familiar, where it challenges her to stand alone. But she has learned that standing alone in alignment is far more powerful than standing with others in confusion, because when you are aligned with your purpose, you are not easily shaken by who comes or goes. You remain steady, focused, grounded, and over time, something remarkable happens. The right people begin to find you, not because you chased them, not because you changed for them, but because you stayed true to yourself long enough for alignment to do its work. And when that happens, you realize something most people spend years searching for. You don't have to choose between your purpose and your relationships when the right people are part of both.